Hey guys, Jeremy here with Inkwell Transfers. Today we are going to instruct in a couple of sections here on how to set up the L1800 printer that we have been selling. So first thing to mention is we're going to do a quick rundown on the parts real quick again, just what comes with the printer. First thing to mention though is to again make sure you've got your software installed with your computer that you're going to use for the printer. That is an important piece to make sure that you have that set up and ready to go. So when we get to the setup and putting ink into the printer and we're getting that all set up, that once that's ready and to go, you will have your computer ready to print and be able to get the ink moving within the printer. So that's the first step. That was also mentioned in the initial identification of things as well for the printer. Again, the things that come with the printer, we're going to use the power cord. The very first thing to mention in the setup, have your printer set up where you are going to print. Again, you want to have your exit tray set up so it is on the table as well and can be connected to the printer. Flat like so. It can't be like this where I've got my table cut off, but it's easier to show you the printer where I don't have a table in front of me. So make sure your setup has that position so you can have your exit tray ready to go. You don't have to have it on there during the setup, of course, because it'll probably be in the way. First thing, initial step here is to get your power cord once you have everything positioned and set up. We have tested the electrical on the printers as they come in, checked connections within the printer. I've taken the top off, make sure everything's connected, make sure everything's powered up. Now it'll be shipping to you, of course, through air, so we want to test the electrical real quick before we put the ink in it as well. So basically you're going to take your power cord out. It's going to get plugged into the back here. Right here, obviously commonly. Once you've plugged that in, you're going to turn this switch on, and it's going to light up there. We can come back around here to the front. So then you've got to power the printer up here. And the main test here is we're not going to turn this on for very long. So you're just going to turn this on, power it on, let it do its setup. This will move back and forth a couple times, and then everything will set still. So as long as everything's coming on here and on the back and everything's setting up, we're good to go there. Alright, so that's the first thing. After that, that's all we're testing. We're making sure that everything's connected electric. Everything should be pretty much good to go at that point electrically. So then you're going to power down here, turn it off, unplug it. Okay, keyword, unplug it. Because then when we go to mess around with the ink and stuff, we don't really want any power to the printer. So the next step, we'll be getting into setting up the ink, and we'll do that here in just another section here in just a second. Alright guys, so the next section of the setup here is we want to get into quickly, we talked about getting your space set up for your printer with the feed tray and where you're going to have it plugged in at, where your computer is going to be, having that all connected in a good work area. The next thing is environment. You want to try to make sure and get a humidity gauge along with temperature gauge for where your printer is going to be. If your printer and where you're going to cure your prints, like the L1800, you're going to cure these independently. If you're doing that in a separate spot, you might want to have two of these, one for with the printer and one for where you're curing. Information with that is your humidity here wants to be between 40 to 60 for printing. The big thing is if you get down below 40, you can start to have considerable issues with your printing, with the ink flowing well, with your head being a little too dry. So you want to make sure your humidity in your room is 40 plus. If you get over 60, you typically don't have any issue with printing. The problem with getting over 60 is connected to curing your prints. Here we have print job cured out. So when you cure your prints, they should look like this. They're going to be nice and cured. There's not going to be any extra residue or anything around the ink after it's been cured. So what will happen is when your humidity gets above 60, you really got to make sure you get the powder off, because you also want to make sure your powder is kept in a low humidity area, especially when you're not using it, because you don't want to get humidity within the powder. That's what will cause powder to stick around the lettering, and will be extra stuff that will have to be burned off when you go to press it, which can be an issue. So that's definitely one thing with the humidity. The other thing with, if you're getting powder stuck to little piece of information, if you're getting powder that is sticking to around your objects, it could be the humidity thing. It could also be static within the film. So it's good. We don't have any issues with static with the film that we buy through the source that we have. That's the main reason why we continue to use them. So major piece here, make sure you've got one of these. You've got to get this dialed in here, and you want to have this pretty well set before you go to start to try to print, to start to try to get your stuff loaded into the printer. You want to make sure your environment's ready to go, because that will only help increase how well the setup starts and how everything goes from the get-go. All right, so the next piece we will talk about will be the ink installation. So I'll kind of end this section here with just mentioning that it is important to go ahead and, if you've got to take this piece off here, there's one screw here that'll come off. There's a little peg in here that fits right into that plastic. That's what holds that on there. So you want to take that off. Again, the printer is not powered into any power. It's unplugged for the ink installation. So go ahead and get that taken off. And then we'll hit the next section here with getting the ink loaded into the dampers and everything going. See you guys in a second. This next section of the L18 printer setup, we are going to get into putting the ink in and go ahead and draw through the dampers. One thing to mention real quick, when you get to this point, or before you get your printer, or as you've got your printer, it is a good idea to go ahead and get the wet cap solution. There's a couple companies out there that you can get this from. That's the only thing that I buy from a company other than our supplier for inks and such. I buy this from printerparts.com. There's other people that sell this wet capping solution for printers. You want to go ahead and get you a bottle of this. This is like a $30 bottle for a liter. This will last a long time, especially with just one print head on this printer. You're going to want to use that. In another video, I'll kind of briefly instruct how to shut the printer down and store it for, between printing. You always want to wet cap if you're not printing. Basically, that's going to save your print head, and it's going to help you greatly decrease problems, and it's going to help you increase how fast your startups are when you go to print again. All right, so into setting up your ink. You're going to need, obviously, your inks. I only have one bottle up here of the yellow, but so you've got four colors, and the white, if you want to look at it that way. You want to have your syringe that comes with it. It is a good idea to go on Amazon, or there's obviously other places other than Amazon that you can buy a bag of these. Typically they sell like 10 to 20 in a bag. It's good to have so many of these laying around because they after using them they do wear out too. So it's good to have these though. You will need these daily to put stuff into the capping station with the wet cap. So you'll need at least one of these daily anyway. All right, so the first thing is obviously you're going to pull out your tanks, and you can do this one at a time. Do a color, then put it back in. These come in and out pretty easy. Obviously, you're going to and get it in there. You're going to go ahead and take one out at a time. Obviously, I'm going to do the yellow first there. You can take it out like that. So when you go to put ink in, you're going to have a line that's going to pull out of your ink here. And you want to make sure that your hose here is all the way down at the bottom of the tank. I don't know if we can see that on the camera, but you want to make sure that hose is all the way down there sucking right off the bottom. That's a very important part. Now you're going to go ahead and you can fill it about a third, no more than a half, because if you do have to kind of start over or something, if we got to start over, you don't want to have a ton. You don't have to deal with all of that ink. 9 times out of 10, that's not going to happen. But there's really no reason to fill all this up all the way. I never fill these up all the way because it's much easier. With the white specifically, you want to move your ink around in your bottle daily, especially with the white. But if you do it with every color, it's much easier to rotate the ink around in the bottle than it is once they're in here. You'd have to pull these out and kind of shake it. And it still doesn't really move the ink as well as it does in the bottle. Okay? So that's why in our big printer, I usually never have more than a third of the big tank put in for these. Okay? So a third to a half. So for the startup, no more than a half full. You're going to go through and fill all of those up. Okay? So once that's done, forgot to put the lid on there. Now one thing to note in here real quick, the other tank that's in here, get the lid all the way on there. This tank right here is the waste tank. So as you do head cleanings, it's going to pump the waste ink that is pushing through the print head during cleanings. It's going to pull it out of the little port under the print head and pump it into this bottle. You'll just need to empty this bottle out, obviously periodically as it gets close to full. Okay? Special note there. Alright, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go by color here. And it doesn't matter what order you do it in. But you can go by color, and I can pull out the one damper here without the little bracket that I had taken off in the last video. I can't go ahead and pull that out without removing it. You just can't get these whites out without doing that. Okay, and you may notice that there is some color on there, probably from the print head being tested. And I'm probably going to assume that color will match up with what it's already that's going to go in there, because that's is that black or cyan?
It's blue.
Okay, so it's the cyan. All right, so you don't really need to know the color because they're ran from the wire. That's why we put the ink in the tank, and then you're going to take your syringe here. You're going to push that in firmly, but not get crazy with it, just enough that you're going to cause a suction. So you're going to pull that out here, and you're going to keep doing that. You want to have some kind of cup to throw. Well, for this you can do, if you leave the lid off of the blue. Let's go back here to the blue. So if I leave the lid off and we do it one at a time, just leave the lid off of the one color you're working. Okay, once you start to hit ink, okay, now here's a good tip, and I just thought of this because I haven't done the setup for a while, is have your blue ink bottle, it's down here, have your blue ink bottle here as you're doing the cyan. As you pull the ink out, you don't want to throw it back in the tank because it's got air. You want to put it back in here because then the air will settle out of that over a little bit of time. Okay, so we want to pull ink from the tank in here. Once we get to ink, you're going to squirt it back into your storage bottle here and not into the reservoir for the printer. Okay, you're going to pull so much ink through, you don't, like 2 or 3 tubes, and if you're not seeing any air, that's important. Now as you look in here in this will fill up with the color, and you want to make sure that you're holding this flat so that you pull out all the air bubbles as much as possible. So once you don't see any air bubbling in here and you pull 2 or 3 of these tubes out of ink, you should be good to go with that damper. And again, put your ink back into your storage bottle and not into the tank for the printer. All right. Now, once that's full, you're going to put that damper back down on the nozzle, matching there on the print head. And make sure that you're pushing that firmly, but it's easy to push on there. But just make sure that's firmly put on there. All right. So the next step here. Is you're going to, obviously, once you're done with one color, if you don't have multiples of these, which is the only one, there's only one of these shipped with it. You want to go take water. You're going to push water through this multiple times, dry it off with paper towel or whatever. Make sure this is completely clean. Now, if you have multiple, and you can just say, you're still going to clean it out, but you can say, well, this is my cyan, this is magenta. You can do it that way as well. The main thing is just make sure this is completely cleaned out for the next color, so there's no mixing. Again, if you can get multiples of these, and you just keep it, maybe even mark a C and an M and a Y and a B for the colors and a W for your white. That definitely eliminates that you're never going to get any colors mixed together. Now, I've never really did that myself. I can wash it. You can wash it completely out and be good to go. You just got to make sure you've completely washed it out, because it is water-based ink, and that'll happen. Good to go. So the next step, going through each color. Take one lid off. Leave all of these sealed. Okay. Just do one color at a time. And just do one damper at a time. Leave all the dampers in there so you don't mix up which port, especially as you're learning. Once you know, okay, the colors in here, you'll know it by then. But at the beginning, you may not. And by memorization, I don't even know what the colors here are too. These are going to be your color. This is probably cyan, magenta, and black and yellow over here. That's usually how there is. But I can't guarantee it. But you're going to know once you pull the ink through, you can be like, oh, this is the yellow one, this is the black one, and so on. We do know these two should be the white because they're a larger damper. And that one has the pumping system connected to it to continue to move ink. All right, so that is the setup for once you've ran through all of those, everything's primed up. You've got all the air bubbles out of that. You are good to go with the ink. Okay, so then next section here, we'll go over the next part of starting up and trying to get it ready to go for printing. Again, so the washout station in here, just make sure that you are cleaning that out and replacing or washing out that felt in there. You can also change that out and put paper towel in there. So now we're to powering up the printer. At this point, again, you have turn the printer on, main power back here, and then front panel power up here. Once you start it up, you're going to initiate some cleanings. So you're going to go, I believe, well, no, maybe it's that. I don't. The ink one. Is the ink one? Okay. The ink one should be the cleaning. This one's a little different than the other ones we've had, but you can also initiate a cleaning from the software as well. You can also initiate the test. So once you do a couple of tests, yes, from the Epson software. Just clarifying that for this printer, from the Epson software printing. So you can run a test here after you've done a couple of cleanings. Now the test, just as an example, this one's on paper, this one's actually for sublimation, but the tests look a lot like this for the L1800, but except for it's going to have one for each color, and then it's also going to have the white. So you're going to want to make sure on your test that you are getting everything filled in. There's no blank channels like this. As much as possible. That's something you're constantly going to check each time before you start printing, for the day. As you learn the process here, if you haven't done DTF before, you're going to, sometimes during the middle of the day, you're going to notice maybe if you need to stop and do a cleaning, you might want to do that periodically, and then you're going to want to do a quick test. So here's a tip about using this type of film. So if you have any bad pieces, or you start to print something and something doesn't start right, keep junk sheets and or trim off pieces. So say if you even start with this sheet and you use so much of it, good or bad, but you don't need to use the whole sheet, go ahead and cut that off and keep this. If anything, you can use those for your test. And with this printer, you can move the film back and forth where you're going to stop and start. So if you do have another test on there, you can go ahead and either cut it off, or you can just move past it and make sure that you are going to start and show the test on a blank piece of film. At that point, if you're getting a good test, you're ready to get into starting to print. If you're not, depending on humidity and things like that, you may have to do more cleanings, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to be ready to go from there once you do so many cleanings. Now sometimes it could take 4, 6, 7 cleanings at the initial start here to get the ink flowing through the print head. Typically probably not that many, but there is a chance you can do anywhere from 4 to 7 cleanings before you get, really get the process moving, because you're basically starting with the print head completely empty. If you're having issues from there, obviously get in touch with us. You have all of our information by then once you're that far. Again, just to cover at the end here with the setup. If you're not getting that far with it and you're like, I'm not sure what's going on with the print head, obviously get in touch with us before you start removing anything out of there or doing anything with the print head, because you can damage it and you'll be out of print head, because it's definitely something that won't be covered, definitely not covered through us and the factory. The company that made this won't cover print heads. Nobody covers print heads because it's basically pretty much, I've never had a print head not work. So if it's broke, something's happened that is caused by somebody when they've tried to work on it. So make sure that you contact us before you do anything like that. All right, thank you guys. All right guys, so we have got to the point where we have the ink loaded into our printer. Everything's been done as far as that. So now we're to the point where we're going to hook it back up to power. We're going to hook it up to the printer or to the computer and get ready to start pulling the ink through the head and getting this ready to print. So as we get to that, you are going to go ahead and get your, open this back up if it was not open, have this pulled up, have 10 plus sheets loaded into that. We're going to need that, and you don't have to do this right away, but you're going to need this obviously to do some testing to see where we are with the print head. So the first thing is to go ahead and plug your power, put your power cord back in, plug that back in, because remember it was unplugged for the ink installation. Go ahead and plug that back in, plug your USB cord into the printer and then into your computer. Make sure you've got your software up so you can get to that as well. Now, you're going to be able to run cleanings from the front things here on the front control panel, and you're also going to be able to prompt those from the computer. So those are two different options there. If you run into some point where you have an issue with either one of those, you can still run a cleaning from, say you're having some software issues or something you had to restart, you need to do cleaning, you can do that from here. Vice versa, for some reason there's an issue here, then you can run it for your computer as well. Just some prior information. So once that's all hooked up, you can go ahead and turn your power on in the back here, the main power that we showed prior, and then you can go ahead and hit your power button here on the front and let the printer start up. It'll do some moving, it'll have it reset itself. Once all that's done, you are going to be ready to go ahead and initiate a cleaning. Now remember, you want to make sure that, bring the camera in here real quick with the washout station. You want to make sure that you've got a pad in this. Your printer may not look completely like this. You may not have this little part in here. You may just have